And now, here's your host of Shaping Success, Wes Tankersley.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to Shaping Success. I'm your host, Wes Tankersley. We have an awesome guest for you today. Before we get there, please do a little housekeeping for me. Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. Make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube. Turn on that bell. We want to get as many people as we can to realize what it is. The show is about showing you and proving to you that success is generated by you. It's whatever you decide that it is. It doesn't have a cookie cutter definition like, hey, I got a lot of money. Hey, I got a nice car. Those are some things that might be helpful for you, but as long as you're doing the things that you love and enjoy and making yourself better every single day, that's what success is. Today, our guest is Alex Jarbo. He's a short-term real estate investor. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means, who he is, why he does it, and let's get right to it. Alex, thanks for hanging out, man. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, I get these notices in my email a lot, and I always have to kind of sift through them and decide, do I want to talk to this person? Do I want to interview this person? Because I think that everyone kind of has to have an idea of the things that need to happen in order to be successful in whatever that may be. And I kind of listen a little bit to some podcasts with you. I try to get a couple minutes just to kind of get a feel of who you are, but I want the questions to be authentic. So let's talk a little bit about who you are and where you came from, and then we'll talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so we can go all the way from the beginning. So I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and then I decided to join the Marine Corps when I was 18. Right out of high school, went straight into the Marine Corps, served for 4.5 years, and then the last year of my enlistment, I sort of just decided I didn't want to re-enlist. So I just started diving pretty deep into just different types of asset classes, whether it be stock market, just overall business, books, real estate. And then real estate had really caught my attention just because I enjoyed the control that you could have over real estate. So I originally joined a flipping mentorship, and the gentleman that was in charge of the flipping mentorship, I realized all of his long-term wealth was like tied into vacation rentals or short-term rentals. Uh-huh. So I immediately got him on a one-on-one call, and I just asked him about it. He was very open with his numbers, showing me what his cash flows were and stuff. And they were crazy compared to some of the other long-term rentals or apartment investing or whatever I was studying. And he helped me choose a market, decide on how to choose a vacation rental market, which is the day I got out of the Marine Corps, I moved to where I live now, which is Asheville, North Carolina. And got my real estate license, started looking for a property for myself. It was about 6 to 8 months of looking, couldn't find anything. Everything was either way out of my price range or it just wouldn't have done well. It was in my, if it wasn't my price range, it just wouldn't have done well as a short-term rental. There was nothing unique about it. So again, after 6 to 8 months of looking, I decided to build my first real estate investment. So my very first real estate investment was an 800 square foot A-frame that we own to this day. Ground up development from land to what we have now. And then one turned into two really quickly, two turned into four, and then took on some investor capital after the fourth one. And then just right now, today, we're developing $10 million worth of real estate and hoping to double that next year, or triple that next year.
Development is kind of one of those things that, so when we're talking about one, right, which is just you buy the property, you build it, whatever, and then you rent that out. And short term, just for people who kind of are talking about this, a short-term rental means someone's going to live in it for, what's the maximum amount they're going to live in it?
I would say anything under 30 days. If you want to really look at the textbook definition of it, it's a vacation rental is categorized as 30 days and under. Anything 30 days and over is considered midterm rental.
Here in Boise, we have a lot of people who are building a house and they have to rent something short term. And usually people don't want to do a lease that's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So people are staying in an Airbnb for 30 days. Yeah. Do you ever get kind of that stuff into your rentals?
Not with the unique properties, man. And the unique properties I look at them as more like destination properties. And they're also, they're priced high. We get good rates for them. So I don't really see anyone renting those houses out for if they're just building a house or maybe just wanting to visit to check out the city for a month or two.
So when you're developing, so we talk, so you're saying the first one was just a single place. So you find a property, you build the house. Now you're developing a whole It's not really a
Yeah,
subdivision, right? It's an actual like kind of like a
they're like micro. I like to call them like micro resorts of like 6 to 12 cabins at the same time. So like we'll choose like a theme, whether it be A-frames, cottages, chalets. We're playing around with tree houses right now, but we'll choose a theme and then build like 6 to 12 around that theme.
So I'm familiar with A-frames and they're kind of cool, but you just said tree houses. let's talk about that a little bit. What's that going to look like?
That. Yeah. Tree houses on stilts in the woods. It's a safer route than just building like a house pinned to the trees or something. Because we're building like I say adult tree houses, like they have full kitchens and full bathrooms. But yeah, like houses suspended in the air. That we market them as tree houses. Just really cool stuff.
So how do you find that kind of property? Because I'd have to imagine like if you're going to build something out in this, kind of like in stilts and you kind of want it in a wooded area where people, it's basically like glamping, right? Like we're kind of camping, but we have all the stuff that we need and we're not really roughing it. How do you find those areas? I mean, is it just like out in the middle of the woods?
Yeah. So we're in the mountains here in Asheville. So like we're in the Blue Ridge Mountains. When I first started, I couldn't invest in the city because it was too expensive. So I went to just like 15 to 25 minutes away from the city. And when COVID happened, that sort of helped us a lot because a lot of people left the metro cities and went into more rural settings. And that seems to be sticking true because our occupancies are still over 90% on all of our properties. They're all in the woods. When it comes to actually finding the property, what I tell everyone that I teach on this stuff is you want to be thinking about the entire guest experience. And what that means is it's not just the property that the guest is staying at. It's also the drive to and from the property. That's the entire guest experience. So what I say is like you don't want your guest to be driving like 30 minutes up a gravel road before they even get to your property. A lot of times they're driving in at night. A lot of time they're new to the area. Sometimes their cell phone reception's not that great. So you don't want them to be scared or annoyed or pissed by the time they even get to your property. Right. So we like to be off of like a paved road to our land or some sort of like state maintained road. So access is like the number one thing I look for when it comes to that. And I mean, after looking at property for the last like 5 years, both on the computer and then also just in person, you get a feel for what would work and what wouldn't work for what you're trying to build. What we usually do is like, I'll have the floor plans already. And then I'll go look for the land. I'll have like the designs. I won't have like the foundation plans done or anything, but I'll have the design of the actual houses and the floor plans done. And that gives us an idea of what the land needs to look like for what we're purchasing for that specific property.
So basically you go out, you start with a plan, like this is the house that we want to put on here. This is the unit that we want to put on there. Then we go find where it'll fit and make sure that it has a good location. It's interesting that you talked about like, hey, we don't want them to be driving 30 miles up a dirt road, because the first thing I think that people think about when they go out and they stay in that situation is how do I get to the civilian area? Like, how do I get to the grocery store if I run out of something, or how do I get to the doctor if I need to?
That's huge when we're looking at land. I mean, that's probably like if you're looking at amenities outside of the property, like that's number one is like, what's the closest grocery store? Because that's where in our check-in messages, like we tell the guests where the closest grocery store is so they can stop there before they even come to the property.
Yeah. And that's important because you gotta, if you need something, you gotta know where to get it.
Right.
It's not like they're out there hunting, killing their dinner and, bringing it back and doing all those things. Right. So you got into this development. So did you were talking about 10 units is what your 10 to 12 units in this area. How big of an area is that as everything planted? Is it within like a couple acres? What's the spacing of this?
Yes. Yeah, we go pretty far out, and that also attributes to like our local zoning and stuff. But I like my properties pretty spread out. So like the 6 acres the 6 cabins that we're developing right now, those are on 15 acres. So it's very spread out. There is room for growth. We'll probably do the full 12 eventually. So we're just starting with 6. Yeah, but anywhere between like 10 to 15 acres. And what I realized was the reason why I started doing these bigger projects, like I'd say those 6 are costing us anywhere between like 2.2 to 2.5 million once they're like turnkey everything. And what I realized was the best use of my time, instead of me going out and looking at 1 acre or like a 2-acre plot that I could put 1 or 2 cabins on. There was no difference in my time between looking at that 2-acre parcel or looking at a 15 or 20-acre parcel where I can do 6 to 8. The number was just bigger, where I just had to bring on more investment capital.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So you talked about, the first one basically was like a personal buy, right? So you bought the land, you built it, and then you built a few more, and then you started getting into the point that you needed investors. Mm-hmm. So your money from the first one carried over probably enough, and you were probably, and I'm just guessing, this is how I would think about it. Like you were able to take a loan on that one to build something else, and then you were able to take a loan on that one to build something else. And then now the rental revenue that comes in makes the payments on it, and then you reinvest again into something else to continue making that cash flow come in, right?
Yeah, and I love giving numbers and examples. I'm pretty open with my numbers. So that very first A-frame, man, that we've owned for like 5-6 years now, we built it for $250,000 turnkey. So with the land, everything, I probably put 30 to 40 grand of my own money, and that money actually was borrowed from someone. It was just a close friend that I just paid like a simple interest rate to. But I put 40 grand of my own money in. Last year, that property, like if you look at the January to December, January, that property grossed 82,000, and then it netted 46,000 after debt service, after all expenses. So it's like the cash on that one property. Granted, that was prior to COVID, so you can discount those numbers by like 20 or 30%. But that property made 100% cash on cash return, just in the just last year alone. So those are the numbers that you're talking about. Is like we've just been, like you just said, like we reinvest most of the money that we make in our properties into, because I mean, my wife and I are aggressively growing the business right now. So there's no point in taking all that money and just blowing it on something dumb.
Well, and that's the thing. I don't know. I think, my life, as I grew up, and I don't know how old you are, but I'm about 42. My parents told me when I was in high school, they're like, you got to go to college. You need to get a good job. You need to get health insurance. You need to basically take no risk and just know that you're comfortable and you're okay, right? And I thought about that for a while. I went to college. I failed the first semester and decided to go into the work sector. And I became I was actually a mechanic. I changed tires for a living for 11 years, and I made really good money. But I worked for someone. I had health insurance. They get you sucked in, and they're like, you're not going to find anything that you're going to get paid this much. You're not going to find benefits. You're not going to find all these things. So you have that choice of being comfortable or taking a risk and having a chance to have more, right? And so that's kind of the switch that you have to have in your head, that there is availability to make more or to be more or to have more, but you have to be willing to take that risk. Was it tough to take that risk?
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. And I talk, so like my parents weren't against me joining the military, but they were worried, right? Like 18-year-old kid, grew up, blah, blah, blah. But that I had a relatively successful military career. Like I made a name for myself, really, I did really well in the military. And my parents could not understand why I was leaving. So it's like you built a really good life here, and like you built a really good foundation to take you the 20 years or whatever time I was going to stay in if I re-enlisted. They couldn't understand why like I was leaving that. And I mean, they were partially right. I mean, it's the same thing. Like I had the health insurance, I had a solid foundation that I built for those 4.5 years. And to just essentially be like, okay, I'm starting over at like the age of 22 and move to a city that I didn't know anyone, any connections or anything. I mean, that was terrifying. But looking back at it now, like that's what shaped me during those times. Because I think about those times, those first 2-3 years, all of the time. It's like, look around now, and it's like my wife and I have a beautiful house that we live in, and it's like I would have never imagined where we are now in the 5-6 years compared to like where I was like 2-3 years ago.
And so now you're developing stuff and you're building more and more. And what are the plans for that? Just to continue, just keep growing it, keep building it?
Yeah, so I would like to get to, we're at 13 units here, and then we're putting on another 24 in the next year. That's where the 10 million is coming from. I think I'm going to get to either 50 to 70 properties in this market. And then I'm going to start looking at other like mountain markets. I like mountain markets because they tend to be a little bit less seasonal than like beach or lake markets. I want to say mountain markets, not necessarily like ski mountains or not like skiing resorts or anything. It's more like just like the Blue Ridge Mountains are just a mountain market. There isn't like ski towns. There are, but it's about like an hour away. So I think that's the next step, is to venture out into other markets. And then I would love to get into like some sort of boutique hotels as well. So like boutique hotels anywhere between like 12 to 36 units that we do like a condo conversion into like a boutique hotel essentially.
So let's talk a little bit, like for someone who wants to get into this, or for someone who's thinking like, hey, I have some money saved, but I don't have enough. Like you mentioned that you were able to leverage what you had or borrow from someone. How did you go about that? I mean, was it a family friend? Did you reach out to people? Hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Did someone have to buy in? What was the process there?
Yeah, I think if I remember right, it was only like 15 grand that I needed because I did have some money saved up. But yeah, it was just like a 10% simple interest that I was going to pay him back in like 2 years, essentially, which I did, just from the cash flow. But yeah, I just approached them, showed them what my projections were. And yeah, I didn't bring them on as a partner or anything. For people who are looking to just start, a really cool, we also buy properties that have some land attached to them where we can develop more properties. So that's a pretty good entry point. If you can find like a small little cabin or a small tiny house that has like maybe 1 to 3 acres attached to it, you can operate that one while it throws off some cash flow, and then you can develop more properties like on that land. Another thing you can do is when I first started, short-term rental loans didn't really exist. Now they exist through a lot of different companies, especially the short-term rental construction loans. But you can get a second home loan, a second home construction loan, depending on where you live in your market. And you can leverage that to build your first short-term rental, which is what we did.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that people get hung up on or get scared about is, what if I don't rent it? What if I don't make money on it?
Yeah.
And I think
that's the first question I asked myself with that. So we originally, before COVID, were running the numbers as long-term rentals. We would underwrite them as long-term rentals. And if that didn't work, we would just sell them. For the square footage that I'm talking about here, anywhere between 500 square foot to 1,600 square foot, that square footage number will always be desirable. That's like if you were to sell that as a normal house, because all of our houses are permanent foundation stick-built houses. So like a different person can come in, a buyer can come in and purchase it as a normal house and get a normal home loan on it. So that's the exit. So if people are scared about, okay, maybe this doesn't rent out, or maybe the regulations change in my city, what if that happens? You can just sell it as a normal house. And I'm sure you're going to make some sort of profit, because like all of our properties, I'm pretty confident that a couple or like a small family can come in there and purchase that property, because affordable, like that, I consider that like affordable housing in the 500 to 1,600 square foot range. Right. And there will always be a need for affordable housing.
Yeah. And that's it's funny because we're talking about that. And you said you're in North Carolina. Is that where you are?
Yeah. Asheville. Yeah. Asheville,
okay.
North Carolina.
So you're in North Carolina. We're in Idaho. So like I'm all the way on the other side of the country. But we have an influx of people coming in here, and those houses that you're talking about, those sizes, those are the highly desirable ones. And it's making it so that we have a lot of people who are moving from out of state that are coming up here, working out of state, making out of state wages, but living in a place where that house that was 1,600 square foot, I bought one 10 years ago, was $117,000. And now it's a $400,000 house.
Yeah, so, right.
That's a tough sell right there. And so it's interesting when, those are the ones that are in demand. Now, when you start getting any bigger than that, in your exit strategy is to sell that if it's not making you the money that you need. Now you have a niche market that's got to be smaller, right? And you're going to have a harder time unloading something that's that big or that size.
Right.
So coming to your investor, you were talking about like, hey, you needed a little bit of money for that first one. You went with a plan, right? You told them what the projections were. You had this plan of where it was going, what you were doing. Was it on paper, or was it just a verbal thing, or how did you prepare them for that?
No, I treat investor money probably 5 to 10x what like a dollar to my dollar is like 10x to like an investor's dollar. Like that's the mentality you have to have when you're taking on other people's money, whether it be friends, family, strangers, whatever. So yeah, I came to him with a plan, a pro forma, projections, where those projections came from. And yeah, we just, it had gotten to a point where on top of capital wasn't necessarily the issue. It was more, I couldn't guarantee any more loans in my name at that time.
Uh-huh.
So that's what part of the investor relationship was, guaranteeing the loan on top of them bringing most of the capital to the table as well. Because just having like someone guarantee the loan, I didn't want to bring on multiple investors. So I was like, I want to find someone that can guarantee the loan and bring all the money to the table, and then I'll take care of the entire development and operation and everything.
Yeah. So if you don't have a lot of money, I think one of the biggest things that I'm trying to get at is that if you don't have a lot of money and you can't, like you said, you had taken out the maximum amount that you could take on a loan. So now you have to try and find it a different way, because a bank is not going to give you that money. You find investors and then you treat them just like you treat the bank, because you want them to know that they can trust you and that their money is going to get back to them and it's going to get there. Right.
Yeah.
So that,
absolutely.
So learning how to do that, now you've done that one time, then you do it a second time, then you do it a third time. Now you can go to bigger investors, right? And talk to them about building something bigger.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we're doing right now. So both building, and we just went under contract for 7 cabins that has like 10 acres attached to it. And that one, again, I'm pretty open with my numbers. That one's probably going to be a $2.5 million purchase. And outside of the due diligence costs that I'm putting in for inspections or anything, I'm getting all that money back at closing. So I'm putting none of my own money into these deals anymore, outside of me actually paying for the inspection. But once closing happens, none of my own money is tied up into these own deals. And I'm getting about like a 20, anyway, depending on what the deal is, anywhere between 20 to 40% of the entire ownership of the deal.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. And I'm putting none of my own money into the deal.
And do you have an option to buy them out if they decide that they don't want to invest anymore?
We're keeping the investors with us pretty long term on these. So like I've teamed up with a couple syndication firms. One's out of Michigan and one's out of New Orleans. That I did a big capital push last year or early this year. But I feel like the best use of my time and where I'm really good at is putting together these deals myself, and then having someone else handle the investors. The investor relationships, because that's its own world completely with regulations and everything. So yeah, exactly what you said. I started with a military friend initially. We built 2 cabins together, moved on to a local friend here that was born and raised here. And then my third investor, which was a JV deal, was a gentleman that lives here that's a business owner. And then after the third one, that's where we went into the syndication fund stuff. But it's literally the same structure for the most part. Outside of the syndication fund, they're bringing all the money, they're helping me guarantee the loan, and then I get some sort of ownership in the deal.
Yeah, and so we'll talk. I just kind of want to talk on the micro, because like I think like we'll talk about the first one a little bit and then where you are now. But like the very first one, what kind of besides buying the property, how invested were you in like the construction and all that stuff? What did you have? What terms of, did you have to be there all the time to help watch them, make sure that it was it just basically, hey, we build it and then we take it and we go? How did that work out?
Yeah. So I have a GC. I'm a developer, so I have GCs that work for me. So depending on how much you trust your GC and how much, that also plays into your management style overall. But initially, I was only going out there maybe once a week once we first closed on the property. That was just me not knowing what to do, like what I was doing. If you have faith that things are getting done, or if things are getting done, which establishes trust with your GC,
right.
I've left my GC to do their own thing for like a month at a time, where I wouldn't go on site for an entire month. As long as I'm getting pictures and updates, I really don't care. I don't have to be on site. Now, if things start going wrong and things are starting getting delayed, I'm on site maybe once a week, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, depending on how delayed things actually are. But yeah, you can manage these things remotely if you're traveling. You just ask for pictures and videos.
Yeah. And as far as like the, with COVID, because you mentioned that, now, were you building during COVID, or how has that bought? Like here, it's like you can't get anything, like refrigerators are 6 months out. Well, it's getting better, but it was terrible. Like I'd walk into a house. So I sell window coverings during the day. So I sell blinds and shutters and shades and stuff.
You were purchasing windows first and just storing them. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
And that's what you have to do, right? Like once you realize that this is what's happening, you got to buy windows, you got to buy, the refrigerators, you got to buy the things that that are going to take forever to get, even though you have the plans, you have all the sizes, you have all the things you need, and you could just go with it.
Yeah. So we had budgets that got caught up in between before COVID and after, like during COVID. So we held off on those for about like a year and a half or two, because there was no way, like we would have blown our budgets by 150 grand at least on some of our projects. So I transitioned into purchasing properties during like the middle of COVID, before things got really crazy. When I took a little bit of a hiatus for about a year, where we were still able to do stuff like site work, but we held off on like concrete foundation and actually building. But I mean, I just fine-tuned my business model in those like 6 to 8 months where we weren't actually building. And then there was a weird time about like 3 to 6 months where like nothing really was happening in terms of me purchasing or building. But again, I was just fine tuning my business plan, because we did go under contract on some properties right when COVID happened, before things really took off, where it was a cabin where there was some land attached to it. And I was like, once things cool down a little bit, because there's no way they're going to stay at these numbers, which they aren't. That's where we can start building on these parcels that have the cabin on them. And that's what we're doing right now. So, yeah, I know. And now, like, it's interesting, because like now things are getting better. It's easier to find stuff. Labor is getting a little bit cheaper. Materials are getting a little cheaper. But then we're playing around with interest rates now. But I'm telling people, like, even if the interest rates are 7-8%, don't discount investing, no matter what you're doing. Like, it doesn't have to be real estate. Don't discount investing completely just because we're going through a correction right now. Like, still underwrite the deal and see if it'll cash flow or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's the other thing though to think about too, is like with what you have going now, is that even if you stop right where you're at right now and you have people who are renting these rentals, you're going to continue to have income rolling in. If you have to wait a little bit for it to turn around before you start building or prices to go down, because the economy has been this way our entire lives. It has its highs and lows, and we had a really long high, and now we're getting that low again. That just so happens to be wrapped up with the stupid pandemic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's like one punch after the other, but you just got to roll with it.
Yep. So what are you mentioned a little bit, like you went and you had a mentor. Are you teaching classes? What is your long-term goal with like getting more people to invest, or what are you here for? Why do you go on podcast and share your story?
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to get my story out there. So the easiest way I've been doing it is, honestly, I've just been documenting stuff through YouTube. So I have a YouTube channel that I like people to hop on. I recently put together a short-term rental development course. Took me like 6 months to put together, but I had a lot of people coming to me and asking me, "Oh, how do you do this? I'd love to work with you." And I just didn't have the time to take one-on-ones, even right now. So that's why I put the course together. I essentially put the course that I wish I had together when I started 6 years ago. So I brain dumped everything. So it's over 120 videos. There's workbooks. There's some group coaching in there, like once a month, like group coaching, Q&A, and all that fun stuff. And that lives on my personal website, which is alexjarbo.com.
Okay. And so what I like about this is that you're not afraid to share what you're doing. And it's not you're not worried that someone else is going to come take your idea, right? There's plenty of pie for everyone.
And especially for real estate, man. Like, there were no A-frames that were on the Airbnb market when I first started, when that first A-frame was built. And now there's probably 8 of them, 10 of them. Who cares? Like, my occupancies haven't been affected at all. It's just 9 other properties that people can rent, like, compared to the thousands that are in the market. So like, it's like a lot of our ideas for properties come from other properties in different markets, whether it be internationally or here. Real estate's so micro niche, like to your specific market, to your specific area. It doesn't matter if someone takes my ideas or whatever, like that doesn't affect me.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the thing, like I've always been the person, like even like in a management position, that share your knowledge with other people, because those people need to know how to do that. And to me, success is like, I'm more successful if other people are successful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the success I've had in the last, like, with things really took off like 2, 3 years ago, um, was when I started sharing my journey, when I started hopping on podcasts, when I started doing the YouTube channel. Most of the relationships I have established now on the short-term rental and business side have all come from just sharing my story.
Yeah.
So if I would have just, like, we call it in the military, like, like, don't be your own island. Don't just live, like, just keep everything to yourself. And I was definitely like that for a couple of years because I was just like paranoid. I didn't want, like, maybe my neighbors to see what I was working on or blah, blah, blah. But like that stuff was just unfounded stuff that just never happened. It was just stuff I was just worried about that was just made up in my head.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's awesome, that you were in the military, because I think that always kind of gives me, like, I never joined anything armed forces wise, but I was in sports, and I feel like you're kind of on this team, and everyone relies on everyone, and you learn how to be on time, how to be scheduled, how to do the things that you need to do, and have, that tunnel vision towards your goals.
And dude, I've said that so many times about, like, I think that's the biggest thing that people struggle with. And I'm sure it's the same thing if you're coming from organized sports as well. Is like when you leave that structure and you're like, okay, this is awesome that I have all this free time. But sometimes that could be a bad thing because you have no structure, and it's on you to create that structure.
Yeah. You got to have a plan, because that's, like you said, I think a lot of people, I have a friend who has been on my podcast before who talks about that. That was the hardest thing for him, because he planned on being a career military person. And then he got medically discharged. And once that happens, it's like, they're not going to let you back in. They medically discharged you. And now you have to have a new identity. You have to figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah. It's like, here, you just built yourself up for as long as you were in. And it's not that stuff doesn't matter when you're getting out, but it doesn't matter as much. You're not around that same group of people. You're not in that structure anymore. So you do have to rebuild yourself. You have to put some sort of structure in your life where, like, if you're working on your own business and you don't have like a job or anything, that falls on you. I look at my schedule every night, every week to make sure, and I'm planning my own schedule out. So it's yeah.
Well, I have to say you're pretty organized, because I know, like, I was looking at, I check in on the day of the podcast with people. I should probably check in a little bit sooner. And you brought up something that I need to make sure that it pops up, the link pops up when it goes onto your calendar, because you have the ability to do that. But there's a lot of people who just look at that and they're like, who cares? Like, okay, it's scheduled. I know it's scheduled, and that's it. And I kind of look at that as, like, I'm grateful when people know that they're here. They're on time.
I'm hopping on people's podcasts before I'm even going on, just to check it out, reading the bio and everything. Like, no, that's super important. You're helping me. I mean, you're helping me with my business the same way I'm hopping on this podcast. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing your story. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we go? You mentioned you had a website. Again, if you want to say that again so people can hear that, and is that the best place to find you?
Yeah, alexjarbo.com, alexjarbo.com. That's where you guys can find my YouTube channel. There are some previous interviews I've done. And then the course is like just a button just right at the top that you guys can sign up for. YouTube channel is a little, it's called Alex Builds. It's a little blue tree house. That's what the logo is. If you just type in Alex Builds into the search bar, I'm sure it'll come up. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. For people who are on bigger pockets, I'm a short-term rental blog writer for their short-term rental content. So I'm awesome. Pretty active in the comments section there too.
Writing, that's the one thing that I don't do. I do all the verbalizing. I mean, how's that treat you?
It's good, man. I was very fortunate to be presented with that opportunity to write for them, because they're like the biggest short or real estate blog community in the country. So a lot of really cool stuff has come from that as well. The blogging is, when I came out of the military, I got my undergraduate, my MBA, and then I'm finishing up a doctorate right now. And
dang.
I've learned to like writing. I mean, it's just like, it's just like, it's the same thing with the structure. It's like, there's a structure to my blogs. They're not really that long, maybe a couple pages long. But it sucks. That's definitely the hardest thing I do. Writing's hard, man.
It is. It's I never really enjoyed it, but I'm a really good BSer. So I have a master's degree too. So, I did what I did, and then I went back to school and became a teacher. And I was like getting my master's while I taught for 4 years. And when the fourth year rolled around, I was like, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah,
but
that's how I feel with my doctorate. I'm in the dissertation portion, just getting torn apart. I'm like, I don't know. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. Well, sounds like you've had a pretty good career and you know what you're doing. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to us about it.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been fun.
All righty. Well, we'll have to do it again.
All right. Thanks, man.
Yep. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. Thank you for hanging out and listening to the show or watching the show wherever you are. Remember, don't forget to subscribe so that we can get more people here. Watch the videos. Let me know if you have any questions. Great conversation about short-term real estate investing. Hopefully that you got some information there. Alex is an awesome dude. Until next time, I challenge you to find the shape of your success.